I thought about putting up on the screen a banner that says, looking for a crystal ball. You know, if you're ever on Facebook, you see all the market pages, people's always selling something. How many would you like to have a crystal ball at times? Just to see what's happening, what's coming down the road. And that brings up the question, but if I had one, would I actually look at it? Would I be bold enough to see what next week, next month, next year, 5 years, 10 years down the road, what it's going to bring? And that's where I think most of us say, I think I'd rather be surprised. But yet, Jesus, whenever he was talking, at one point, he challenged the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he says, you guys can look at the sky and tell what the weather's going to be. If it's red of the morning, it means one thing. If it's red of a night, it means completely different. And yet he says you can't see what's going on all around you right now. There are times to where we would like to have a crystal ball, but then there are also times to where we would like to just see what's coming, but yet we'll open up our eyes we can. I remember hearing a story about a guy who was a stranger driving down a dirt road, and he was going down through there, and all of a sudden there's a sign that says, the end is near. He thought, well, what's that? He drives a little bit further, and he says, the end is getting closer. And he thought, well, what kind of fanatic is that? And then he keeps going on down the road, and he finally sees another sign that says, the end is at hand. And as he's looking in the rearview mirror to think, what kind of a nutcase would do that, he goes off a cliff and into a big ravine. And the tow truck driver that finally shows up and pulls him out, he says, why don't they put a sign up? And he says, you passed 3 of them on the way. Well, there's so many things that are going on in our world today that we can kind of see what's coming down the road. History has a way of repeating itself, especially when we don't pay any attention to it. Now, I want to just read a few passages out of the first chapter of Jeremiah, but I want to look at what my Bible commentary says about the time of Jeremiah. Because as I started studying what the commentary said about Jeremiah, it alarmed me as to what's going on today. First thing it says, Bailey. Jeremiah preached and lived in an age of change and revolution. He lived and preached from 626 to 586 BC, before Christ. This was how long it was before. The time of Jeremiah, next one, please. Jerusalem was undergoing for enemies. Jerusalem was still a nation. But because of the road it was traveling down, they were getting to the last days. We have all known friends, we have all had loved ones who were in their last days of their life, and you see their health declining and their breathing getting shallower, and this is kind of what was going on with the nation of Israel, of Jerusalem. It was a period, go back just a second, please. It was a period of hardness towards God, of obstinacy, which was the stubbornness to follow opinion over fact, and apathy. Oh, who cares? Before we go on to the next one, if you watch the news at all, you know that we have no unbiased news channels at all. Does anybody notice that? There is no unbiased. You pick out the opinion you want to watch, and that's the one you follow. Because if you watch one channel, it will give you the news according to what they want to see it as. You can see the same report on another channel, and it sounds like they're talking about peas and carrots because it doesn't sound at all like what the last guy said, who was looking at it from a different angle. The days of just reporting the news are over with. It's all opinion-based. And they all report opinions as fact. Does that sound familiar? Next slide, please. In the days of Jeremiah, vices and injustices of all kinds were rife or widespread, such as idolatry, unbelief, ceremony, rituals, disregard of equality and honor, immorality, and licentiousness. I can't hardly pronounce that. Sexual impurity is basically what I was talking about. I mean, everybody was just doing their own thing. And everybody was right. And everybody wanted to force what they were doing as being right, and everybody should agree with it. Sound familiar? There was no justice, nor purity, nor integrity, nor nobleness. Murder, perjury, and theft abounded. And conditions were growing worse. This is what my Bible commentary says about the book of Jeremiah. This is based on the history, that was based on what was written in here. This was conditions that Jeremiah was faced with. Is that the last one, Bailey? So, with that in mind, I want us to look at the first chapter in the book of Jeremiah. It says, the words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah the priest, were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. It also came in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah, until the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the exile of Jerusalem in the 5th month. If you're a history buff and you'd like to put a timeline on it, that's what the first 3 verses are for. Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. Then I said, alas, Lord God, behold, I do not know how to speak, because I am a youth. But the Lord said to me, do not say, I am a youth, because everywhere I send you, you shall go. And all that I command you, you shall speak. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord stretched out his hand and touched his mouth, and the Lord said to me, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. See, I have appointed you this day over the nations and over the kingdoms, to pluck up and to break down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. He starts out, God speaks to Jeremiah, and he says, before your mother knew you, while you were still in your womb, I called you out. Now, as I read that again a couple of times over this week, I thought, how many people in this day and age would automatically say everything you got to say is irrelevant because that's not a baby until you decide it's a baby. It's not a human being until you decide whether you want it or not. You know, how sickening and how sad is that? And there again, you're going into my opinions speak so much louder than what the facts do. And that's what I'm basing it on. But God says before you were even in your mother's womb, while you were still, before I even formed you, I called you and set you apart. And I consecrated you to do the work of a prophet. And this was whenever Jeremiah was still a young boy. And Jeremiah says, you know, I'm just a kid. He says, how can I do what you've called me to do? You know, does that sound familiar? Remember Moses, whenever only he was 80 years old, and God spoke to him out of the burning bush, and he says, you know, I'm calling you to go set my people free. And he said, but I stutter. He said, I'll take care of that. So Jeremiah had no argument. And he says, I will put you over nations, over kingdoms, over people, and your job is going to be twofold. It's going to be to tear down and to build up. Why is that? Why did he use both things? You know, as a preacher, it is so easy if I just wanted to preach on sin. I could pick a new sin every week and just really lambaste it and really just pick on it and just tell how awful it was and everything. And just, you know, of course I would be very selective because I don't want to step on my own toes. I'd just, pick on everybody else. But, you could just do that every week. And there would be a certain segment of people who would just love you for that until you got off into their category. Or you could go into the other side of it and say, I can just talk about, how great God is and how much he loves you and how everything is just rosy whenever you live for God. And how he just, he doesn't care about what you've done, and he just loves you, and he just loves you, and he just wants to bless you, and all this flowery stuff, and never really address any issues, and there would be a big crowd that would follow you because of that. Don't believe me? Name some names. But I'm not going to, because you probably know who they are on TV. But God tells Jeremiah, he says, what I want you to do, he says, I want you to do, first, call sin, sin. And second, I want you to show them a solution. It doesn't do any good to call sin, sin if you don't have a way forward from there. And that is a true gospel message. Jesus didn't come and preach on the earth and say, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. He did admit these things are wrong. And we're going to base it on the truth. And the point of it is to lead you all into a closer, more intimate walk with God. To bring you into that place where maybe you don't even realize that that's where you need to be. Now, the problem that Jeremiah had was whenever he started telling people all the things that God was giving him and how he was pointing out that the error of their ways was to following after all the false gods and going in the ways that were contrary to the ways of God, you can only imagine the kind of reception that he got. And it wasn't friendly. And he suffered immensely for it, and continually, basically all of his ministry. And part of what he gave was not just all the things that are wrong, but how to lead you in the right path. That's a neat thing about God's prophets. They did tell what was wrong, but they also all offered a solution. They also offered a method of deliverance, of redemption, of walking with God. Looking at all the things that we looked at a while ago, this is the time that Jeremiah preached. Let me go ahead. Verses 11 through 19. And the word of the Lord came to me, saying, what do you see, Jeremiah? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. Then the Lord said to me, you have seen well, for I am watching over my word to perform it. And the word of the Lord came to me a second time, saying, what do you see? And I said, I see a boiling pot facing away from the north. Then the Lord said to me, out of the north the evil will break forth on all the inhabitants of the land. For behold, I am calling all the families of the kingdoms of the north, declares the Lord. And they will come, and they will set each one his throne at the entrance of the gates of Jerusalem, and against all its walls around about, and against all the cities of Judah. And I will pronounce my judgments on them concerning all their wickedness, whereby they have forsaken me, and have offered sacrifices to other gods, and worshipped the works of their own hands. Now gird up your loins, and arise, and speak to them which I command you. Do not be dismayed before them, lest I dismay you before them. Now behold, I have made you today as a fortified city, and as a pillar of iron, and as walls of bronze against the whole land, to the kings of Judah, to its princes, to its priests, and to the people of the land. And they will fight against you, but they will not overcome you. For I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. He first starts out, he's called Jeremiah to preach, to be the prophet. He says, picked you from even before you were in your mother's womb. Before I even formed you, I had set you aside to do this work. And Jeremiah says, but, I'm just a kid. I can't speak and I do all this stuff. He said, I'll take care of that. And he said, he touched his tongue and it give him the ability to speak. And then he says, now then, he says, open your eyes and what do you see? And he says, I see an almond branch, a sprig. Now, this threw me. What's that mean? In those days, at that time, in that place, the almond tree was the first of all the trees that bloomed. And so whenever you was living in that time and you would see an almond tree bloom, you knew that the earth was coming awake. And it was about time for everything to start happening. So what he showed with him was an almond branch, which he was familiar with, and it says the time's at hand. The time is now. Things are going to start happening because what you see is an almond branch, and it was in bloom. It means things are being woke up. And then he says, all right, now what do you see? And he says, I see a boiling pot. He says, that's right. Things are going to start heating up. Things are going to start getting real. That's basically what God is telling Jeremiah. Things are going to start happening. And the nations of the north are going to be coming and besieging Jerusalem and Judah. And they're going to be judging Judah for their wickedness, for serving other gods, for following false idols, for all those things that we mentioned earlier. He says, all this thing is going to have to be answered for. And he says, and they're not going to be very nice to you whenever you give them the message. And if you read through, you find out that they weren't. He says, but don't worry. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be with you. Now, what's that got to do with us today? We could talk about, if you wanted to, we could talk about how this could be a sign of the end times, if you want to. We could talk about how every writer of the New Testament warned the people that the day is coming when people will gather for themselves teachers that will tickle their ears and tell them just what they want to hear. When the message will be so distorted that you won't even recognize where it came from, but it will be under the context of religion. I think we're in that. There's so many of the things that were going on in the days that God says, I've had enough with my chosen people that it's time to start calling them to account. There are so many of those things that are going on in our world today. Now, I mentioned, if you had a crystal ball, would you look into it? No. But sometimes you can see things coming. I mean, and honestly, I'll be the first to admit, it's easier to see disaster looming in the lives of somebody else than it is yourself. I mean, how many times have you met somebody or somebody and they're just going down the wrong path and you just think, boy, any day I'm going to get that phone call that they're no longer here or that they got thrown in jail or this happened or that happened and this happened, and yet we can't see what's going on our own. That's because we've got an excuse. We've got an excuse, so that excludes us. That's not going to happen to us. We're all immortal whenever it comes to our own mistakes and failures. But we can see it in others. But if you can see what's looming, if you could kind of get an idea of the direction that we are heading, would you make any changes? If the stranger going down the dirt road would have realized that the end is near, meant the road, he might have slowed down. He might not have ended up in the ditch. The reason I want to share this message today is because this is, I believe, a time in our country, in our world, in our religion, that we need to look and take a good close look of where we're going as an individual and as a body. And start making any necessary corrections that we might need to make so that we don't end up in a deep ravine. And of course, the first place to start is in the mirror. You know, what am I making excuses for that I need to quit making excuses for and start owning up to? What is it that I need to start actually living up to? What is it that I need to become more dedicated to so that I don't end up where I don't want to be? Now, I mentioned earlier that, you know, whenever Christ came and preached, you know, you think of all the people that he preached to. You know, there was people that were lame, I'm sure, from probably previous mistakes that they had made. There were people who were diseased, maybe because of the lifestyle that they had lived. There were people in bad situations that were probably there due to their own poor choices. But do you notice that what the strongest words he said for them was, go and sin no more? You know, you remember, anybody remember Hee Haw? Anybody remember that show? You know, and the guy would come to the doctor and he said, doctor, he says, whenever I do this, he says, it hurts. And what did Archie, the doctor, always do? Hit him in the head with a rubber chicken and says, well, then quit doing that. You know, it sounds simple, doesn't it? But whenever we've indoctrinated ourselves into our excuses for so long, as society, we say, well, what I'm doing is not as bad as what so-and-so's doing. So, does that make it right? No, it doesn't. Because you know what? Do you know how many people I can control the outcome of their salvation? One. That's me. That's all. I can help, I can point, I can lead, I can give counsel to, but ultimately the decision rests with them. And this is, to me, what this message today is all about. It's just being honest with ourselves and say, Lord, you know, search my heart and see if there's anything that, you know, any wayward way in me, that I might walk in a closer walk with you. And it may not be the most popular thing. It may not be what everybody else is doing. But I'm not worried about what everybody else is doing. I'm more concerned with what you want me to do. I don't want to be caught in the fold that whenever you stand before the throne of God and he goes, and who are you? And what are you doing here? You know, we all want to, whenever this life is over, to hear those words, well done, thou good and faithful servant, enter into your rest. I don't think he's ever going to tell anybody, well, you know, I'm going to grade on the curve, and, you know, you just barely squeezed in. Or you just barely got nudged out. Because this guy over here kind of straightened his life up at the end, and it just threw the curve way off. You know, I can remember the curve whenever I was in algebra in 8th grade in Trenton. You know, it's the only thing that got me passed through that class. I flunked every daily assignment because I tried to do it my way, and it was always wrong. But then I learned from my mistakes, which was the dumbest way to do it, but I learned from my mistakes, figured out how to do it, and then on Fridays we had the test, and I aced the test. And it made everybody mad because they thought I was cheating, because they thought, you know, how could the guy who flunks every day ace the test? Well, I learned the hard way. And he graded on the curve. And it worked for me. Some of the others didn't get along with it too well. But we are not going to be graded on whether we're better than anybody else. And really, it doesn't matter. Because if we will be honest with God, He's just wanting to lead us into the right path. He's wanting to lead us into a path where He can just pour out His heart upon us, where He can show us even greater how much His love for us is, how much He wants to just bless us, how much He wants to just be our Father and us to be His children. And sometimes everybody who raises children knows that you don't discipline because you're mean, you discipline because you love. And whenever you discipline out of love, then you expect a correction, but then you also expect to reward good behavior. You know, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, you know, we need to be coachable as Christians. And what I mean by that as coachable is, you know, in a small town, you have limited available talent. And that's what I love about the coaches in a small town, is they take what they have and they make the very best that they can out of it. Whereas you go to a big city and you select out of hundreds and hundreds of kids to pick out 10 or 20 or whatever. But you have such a pool to come from that you pick the most talented and work with them. But the kid in the small town who's not a very good player, and on the way home, mom and dad or grandma or grandpa says, "Oh, you did a fine job. You did a fine job. You know, you couldn't expect to catch that ball just because it was hit to you. You know, you shouldn't have expected to catch that ball even though he landed it in your hands. You know, you did a great job." But a coach will say, "You need to concentrate. I just want to help you to do a better job and to perfect your skills, because it will make you feel more complete, it will make you feel more successful, and it will make you so much happier." I'm not trying to tear down what you did wrong. I'm trying to help you to do better. If we could just be more coachable with God and quit looking at God as saying, "You can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do this," and start looking at Him as, "I want to help you to do this. I want to help you to overcome this. I want to lead you in a path that you will be more pleased with yourself. You'll be more productive. You'll be happier. You'll be more fulfilled. But first, we've got to get some of this bad stuff out of the way. Go and sin no more. Not you worthless piece of human trash, but go and sin no more. And then come follow me." That was really Jeremiah's job. And if you read just a little bit into that book, you'll find out that he got disrespected, he got treated bad, he got thrown in prison, killed by his own people. But he stayed true to God. And the most important part was whenever he stood before the throne of God, I know that God says, "You did a good job. You did just what I told you to do." And there are those who disregarded what you had to say. We all know that. But then there are those who paid attention and followed. That's who I was after from the beginning. If we can be coachable, if we can just be honest with ourselves, throw all the excuses out and say, "God, what is it we need to work on? What is it that we need to do to get closer to one another? What is it we need to do so that I can be a blessing to you and that you can be a blessing to me?" And then just act on it. You know, there's so much junk and garbage going on in our world today. There's so much that is going in every direction except towards God. If Christians, if God's chosen people are not the bright spot, if they are not the light, then who is anybody else going to turn to? How will anybody ever find God if we don't point him in that direction? And that's not by being perfect, but it's by being real. It's by putting forth a legitimate effort. You know, I've heard coaches say this before about some of their players that they've had. They said they weren't the best player, but they had the most heart. And so they were the most fun to coach because whatever you told them to do, they tried their best. They put it forth, and they laid it all out on the line. And I think if we can be coachable, I think that's what God will have to say about us. This morning as we've gathered here for worship, I know that it's, and that clock back there is not working, but I know that, you know, it's past lunchtime for most of us, what we're used to. But we're going to survive. But if God is speaking to your heart, maybe he's pricked one thing, just one thing, to your consciousness, to your memory, to whatever this morning, then once you be honest with him on that, and as we stand to sing the hymn of invitation, if you need to make a response, then do so. But don't disregard, and don't excuse, and don't deny. As we stand to sing the hymn,